The relationship that people develop with their podcast host spans over years. And because of that, the podcast host has a tremendous amount of influence and trust with their listeners. And podcasts themselves have life-changing power. No matter what kind of podcast we're making, we are creating an auditory experience. Why is it that we wanted to start a podcast to begin with? By being honest with you and looking you straight in the face and saying, Hey, welcome to your complete podcasting workshop. I'm Studio Steve. I make free content for Pod Sound School here on YouTube, and I'm also an instructor inside our online courses for creators and creative professionals. You can go to podsoundschool.com to find out about all of the online programs we offer. So it's time for a podcast makeover. I hope you have a notebook, a pen and a paper out, and you're ready to roll up your sleeves and open up your mind and answer some difficult questions as we do an audit of your show together here. And my goal is to help you with one of two things. Either one, to help you give your podcast a makeover and increase listener engagement and retention and the overall listener experience, or two, to help you retire the show that you're currently making and start a new one. Or as I like to call it, to pod fade gracefully. And if number two is what I wind up helping you with, I want to clear the air right now and clear off any potential shame or regrets that you may have if you have already pod faded, or if you're considering what you would call giving up on your show. So it was podcast listeners and fans that coined the term pod fade. And it is almost a humorous term because what it is describing is so common. It describes what happens to countless podcasts from the listener's perspective. They start struggling to put out episodes consistently. Maybe they go long periods of time. Maybe the actual excitement and enthusiasm that the podcast host once had starts to kind of taper off until eventually they just fade out and stop producing their show. The other remark you'll hear from podcast listeners is, my podcast ghosted me. Both of these naturally have kind of a negative connotation to them. From the podcaster's perspective, it's really easy for us to have regrets or even carry some shame about giving up on our podcast, this thing that we were committed to, that we wanted to grow into so much more. It wound up taking too much of our time, and it seemed like it was interfering with our life more than it was benefiting our life. And sadly enough, in the case of many podcasters, they won't start another podcast. They won't begin again with maybe a show that would be more appropriate for them, that they could support more easily and try with a different angle and their new set of expertise to catch a different audience. Or in the case of what I call a graceful pod fade, which is where you openly talk to your audience about the fact that you're losing interest in your topic, or that this podcast is kind of interfering with your life and you're going to transition into a new podcast. You could either stay on the same RSS feed and just completely change your show, or you can create a new RSS feed and a new podcast feed and bring most of your loyal listeners that you currently have with you. So instead of ghosting them or fading out on them, you bring them with you on your journey of idea expression. So please allow me to just let you off the hook with any of that shame. You don't need to have it. If you were an author trying to write a best-selling book, it would be very rare that the first book you ever wrote would even get published, let alone become a best-selling book. You'd have to have many attempts, many different angles of writing a book until you really get that product to market fit and really hit the marketplace with something unquestionably good. So that's what we're going to do in this video together. We're going to take a true and honest, open-minded look at ourselves and our own primary motivations for podcasting to begin with. We're going to review kind of what a podcast even is and what the real benefits of podcasting are. And then after we've gone to the drawing board and really done an audit and a check of what we have going on, then I will finish up this workshop with you sharing some actionable tips, some cool techniques that you can put to use on your podcast right now to give it a makeover and to make it shine, and to really achieve what we're always after as podcasters, and that is to improve the experience of the listeners. We are creating an auditory experience. No matter what kind of podcast we're making, no matter how we record it, no matter what microphone we use, we are all making an auditory experience for our listeners. And there are very effective things that you can implement today that would immediately improve that experience. So first, let's remind ourselves of the benefits of podcasting, maybe what we were after to begin with, what got us to think, hey, I want that. Well, the benefits of podcasting are plentiful and they are many, but the real lucrative and really rewarding benefits from podcasting come after a long time. It's a long-term game. And if you stay at it and hang in and have many iterations of your shows, or perhaps many different podcasts that you produce, or you're constantly giving your podcast makeovers, improvements like you're doing by watching this video, then over the course of a few years, that's when sort of a turning point will start to happen, and you'll start to see an exponential growth in terms of the benefits that really start coming in. And those benefits really are authority, notoriety, opportunity, experience, a growing audience, and tons of professional benefits. And in terms of business, if you want to start a podcast or you're using your podcast to grow your business, well, podcasting is the safest type of media that you could create in terms of content marketing or marketing efforts for your business. The relationship that people develop with their podcast hosts spans over years. And because of that, the podcast host has a tremendous amount of influence and trust with their listeners. Compared to the trust or the relationship that we build with people we follow on social media or people that we watch on YouTube, it's not even on the same graph. We really trust our podcast hosts, especially when we've been nourishing that relationship over years. So plan on being in this game for the long term, because that's when you really start to see some serious benefits. And as I just touched on, podcasts are a very effective influencer tool or influencing machine. And podcasts themselves have life-changing power. TikTok videos, YouTube videos, and all of that have the power to change people's lives and really influence their buying decisions. But podcasts, specifically because of this trust factor, have the potential of truly changing people's lives. And podcasting itself, the act of podcasting, also has immense life-changing power. And why is that? And that kind of brings us back to, what is it that we are doing when we're podcasting, or what is a podcast? And this is something that I've constantly been refining and changing my definition on over the years. It's a keyword here on YouTube. People are always asking about it. What is a podcast? So I've really spent a long time pondering this. And the way that I think of what a podcast is that podcasts are ideas, or a collection of ideas. And if you just replace the word podcast with idea when you're thinking about like podcasts or podcasting or any of your considerations, I think that it really puts your mind in the right place when you're thinking about what a podcast is. So podcasters are actually idea makers, or you go writers. I mean, what are we broadcasting other than ideas? So as a podcaster, I share ideas, I inspire, I inform, I educate, or I entertain. That's pretty cool. And that's something we can really get behind. So that's something to really remember exactly what it is that you're doing. You're sharing ideas, you're broadcasting ideas, you're inspiring people. And I think it's really easy when we get into the grind and we start struggling to put out those episodes every week for us to forget the magic behind what it is that we're actually doing. So those are the benefits of podcasting. That's kind of what we're doing when we podcast. But why is it that we wanted to start a podcast to begin with? What is it that we're after? Really thinking and pondering and meditating on this question is really all of the podcast makeover that you need. So to get you going on that, take that pen and paper that you should have, and I want you to write down these two questions. Do I want a podcast to be seen? And then the second question is, do I want a podcast to provide an experience for people? So now that you've written down those two questions, really look at them and think to yourself, which one of those questions would you identify with the most? I don't think that this is really one way or the other. I think there's some gray area for all of us between these two questions. This really gets deep into our humanity and what makes us human. And it's really great to think about what makes us human and what makes us tick when we're thinking about why we're podcasting to begin with, and also when we're thinking about the audience that we're podcasting for. So what is it that makes humans tick? What is it that we need? Many psychologists argue that we need love more than we need food and water. And at a fundamental level, all of us just want to be heard and seen and loved. But the problem is, if you fall into this first category and you want to start a podcast or you want to podcast to be seen, is that it may be coming from a place of insecurity or even low self-esteem. All of us, no matter what our background, by the time we enter into the adult world, we've been ridiculed, judged, told that we're wrong or that we're not doing something right. Some of us have been abused, and we all carry these traumas, and we all have this as part of our humanity as adults. And because of that, many of us have developed these beliefs that you could call low self-esteem beliefs, and we can all relate to the feeling of that there's something wrong with us, or that fundamentally we believe that we are undeserving of love, that there's something fundamentally defective about us, or something wrong with us, or that we'll never be as good, or that we're not worthy of love. And then because of this confirmation bias that they talk about in psychology, we're always trying to confirm that belief. And that's why when you're in this first category of really seeking approval, seeking for people to like you, podcasting or creating content for the purpose of being seen, And what it really does is it pollutes and contaminates the real message and the real value that you have to offer your audience. So if you could really take this moment internally and think to yourself, how strong is that human belief in me that there's something wrong with me or that I'm not worthy of love? And then instead of finding things in your life to confirm that lie, find things in your life that will erode that lie or that will confirm the truth, which is you are loved. You are incredible. There are people in your life that cherish you and that you have a unique voice that's unique to you. The more that you really feel that and let that be in your body, then the more you will shift from that top question to the bottom question. And the more you'll shift into the second category of actually sharing what you know is so great about you, sharing what's unique about you with people by inspiring them and making content for them to create an experience for them. And this shift happens in businesses, in podcasts, all of the time. And when you see this shift happen is when you see businesses really grow. When you see this shift happen in podcasts is when you see them really attract the audience and start making the waves that they were meant to. But again, I want to clear away any shame or regrets that you may have in this department that, or when people say, quit making this about you, and say that that's just a human thing. We've all been doing that. And that my entire adult creative life was spent in the first category, seeking that validation and that constant approval and constantly trying to control or get people to like me rather than own my own confident self and provide a unique experience for people. Two different things, two different approaches. And the latter approach is an approach that has huge probability for success and is incredibly more fulfilling as a pursuit. When the majority of your focus is on providing value for an audience rather than being seen or being validated, you won't worry about negative comments. They won't even faze you. You won't be checking analytics. You won't get analysis paralysis. You won't have comparanoia. And that one mindset shift or that shift in your beliefs that you are valuable, that you are amazing, and that you do deserve love, essentially, is kind of what's going on underneath all this, is really the only podcast makeover you need. But I'm not going to leave you with that philosophical or psychological stuff only. Let's actually get into the production tips for a podcast makeover. So I say production tips because really, if you truly wanted an amazing podcast makeover, what you might be in need of is a production team. And I know that as independent podcasters, we can't always afford a production team. But this brings me to the mandatory team member that any podcast requires. And that is a podcast editor, a professional podcast editor. You have to be able to budget for that and have a professional podcast editor working on your team if you really want to see your podcast grow. And there are two reasons that it's mandatory that you work with a professional podcast editor. The first is time. You simply don't have the time with your daily life and everything else that you're trying to do to be editing your podcast. But your podcast needs to be edited. As the creative behind your show, as the visionary behind your brand, your expertise and skill is much needed elsewhere besides the editing. And then number two is that you are not a professional. Now, if you do want to become a professional podcast editor, that's a different story. And in fact, we do have the only program in the industry that certifies podcast editors, and we train the best in the industry. You can go to podsoundschool.com to find out more about that. It's called the Podcast Edit Lab. But unless that's your intention to actually be a professional podcast editor, then you're not a professional. And working with a professional allows for so much more than just increased audio quality. It also allows for any of your creative visions you may have with your show. It allows for those to be a possibility. You'd be amazed by the experience that you will have as a listener listening to your podcast after it's been in the hands of a professional. But this does bring up a mandatory budgetary concern for all of us, especially those of us just getting started or independent podcasters that have a small budget. But the truth is, to work with an actual professional, somebody who can collaborate with you and add true professional industry standard audio quality to your show, that's going to be a minimum of $500 a month at the time I'm shooting this video. And that's for 4 episodes. You're going to be minimum $150 an episode if you want to work with a professional. And you owe that to your show. And again, this is an investment that will pay off big time in the long term. And again, in the theme of higher level coaching, if we were on a coaching call together and you weren't able to budget that minimum of $500, if not more like $1,000 or $2,000 a month into your show, then we would have to really consider whether you should be pursuing podcasting at all. Editing your own show is not an option, and not editing your show is also not an option. Neither one of those are options for a real podcast that's really going to be a legitimate good experience for the listener. And that is the first tip in a podcast makeover, is to enhance your sound quality. And you can plan ways of eventually being able to afford a podcast editor and do it yourself for a trial period. There's nothing wrong with that. My go-to for that is Descript, and Descript has all these amazing features, including a studio sound button that really helps to enhance the quality of your recordings. Of course, really training yourself on using the best equipment, the best microphones, really good microphone technique. And when you're working with guests on your show, to find a way to communicate with them and be stern with them that you really prioritize the highest quality of audio and ensure that they're using at least a USB microphone and that they shut off any air units and that they perform really good recording practices to begin with. And then the really advanced techniques that a professional podcast editor will incorporate into your show is the processing stage to begin with, which is EQ, de-essing, compression, noise gates, or noise reduction, and then any time-based effects that you may need here and there from outros and intros like reverbs and delays that are set up on aux sends. And that's just the processing stage. There, of course, is the cleanup stage where they're going to make a lot of executive decisions to rearrange the order of your show in any way, to create engaging intros and outro pieces, to add sound effects wherever needed, and to also make executive decisions to cut out certain sentences, to progress the conversation in a way that implements storytelling techniques, but that also finds a balance between the pacing and the removing of the long pauses and the filler words and all of that advanced stuff. Like I said, you'd be amazed at what your podcast would sound like edited by a professional. You'll be a fan of your show, and not just because you like the sound of your own voice. Studio Steve. So that is the sound quality category. Now let's move on to a different category of improvement or of makeover, and that would be your content or the structure, you could say. Let's work with that category for a minute. Here's some tips to be plan your episodes. Spend a little more time in the pre-production process. I also encourage clients that I work with to take big seasonal breaks and to really tell their audience that they plan on taking seasonal breaks, and to take the opportunity of not releasing episodes for a longer period of time so that you can batch record and get a lot of episodes batch recorded and sent to your editor, but also so that you can plan and have more time for pre-production. Pre-production is the least expensive in terms of time and money of the whole process, and it's often the most overlooked and the most skipped process. We just throw a microphone up and hit record. We need to spend more time planning our episodes. And that can include the main topics that you're going to cover, what guests you'd like to appear, and also how you are going to structure your episodes so that it really keeps people engaged and entertained throughout the whole episode. You want to think about engaging storytelling techniques. How can you start the story? How can you incentivize people to keep listening? What can you promise them is going to come later in the episode? And don't forget to add variety. I always encourage fun segments. And segments are something that are even easier to do and very effective when you're working with a good podcast editor. Some common segment ideas that you can experiment with are listener questions. I love this one because it increases engagement with your listeners. And this is where you dedicate a segment of your show to go through questions that were submitted by listeners. Another one is behind the scenes. You can share some behind the scenes clips or interviews of you actually producing or putting together the podcast episode. Or maybe you can record yourself on your phone or something a little more candid. Record yourself on location somewhere, either with your phone or a field recorder, and you can actually get some ambient noise or bring people into an adventure that you were on as a behind the scenes sort of segment. Another great one is really easy to work in is tips and tricks. The thing I love about tips and tricks is this also is a perfect little thing to repurpose into social media bites. And any podcast can do it. Just provide tips and tricks related to the themes and the topic of your podcast. Weekly Roundup is another really fun segment. This is where you would just cover whatever interesting news happened in the industry related to your podcast that week. Quiz or trivia or any kind of game show style segment can be really fun, especially with the guest. I love lightning rounds. Any kind of game you can play with the guests are always going to be fun. Segments are one of my favorite things to incorporate into a podcast episode, partially because from an editing or a sound design standpoint, this gives you an option to actually include sound effects and music in a way that's intuitive and natural. And also because it keeps people engaged. It creates habitual listening and it encourages audience engagement, which allows you to further build relationships and actually engage with and get to know your audience, which opens up an incredible channel of communication for feedback. Now, while we're talking about segments, we could also probably put into this episode intros and outros. I do not think that as podcasters, many of us are taking enough advantage of a good intro and a good outro. There is so much you can do with episode intros, and some of my favorite podcasts that I listen to that I've been listening to for years have incredible intros that open up this story loop and hook me in, and there's nothing I can do about it. I have to listen to that episode to hear how that little teaser they showed me at the first of the episode, I need to hear how that turns out. You can do the same thing with your listeners. Open up the story, introduce the problem, make some promises. One technique that you can do with this, but it will require a professional editor, is to tease your content. You could tease the content with dramatic music and sound effects and really bring people into your episode right from the beginning. At very least, you need to make sure that you're introducing the episode, giving them a roadmap, telling them what they're going to expect. It doesn't have to be flashy and sound designy the way I would recommend it, but it should at least spark interest and make a promise. Tell people where you're going to take them on this episode. Also, keep the intro short and sweet. Don't go on for too long. Nobody likes an intro that's too long. And don't forget to include your call to action, and never feel insecure about including your call to action. We need to capture leads. We need to promote any affiliate relationship we have going on. Don't hide behind that, honor that, and put that right up front in your intro. And then episode outro, so overlooked. It shouldn't be, well, catch you next week. This is a time for you to create a unique outro for each one of your episodes, in addition to whatever pre-recorded outro music you might have that you're sliding into every episode. This is where you want to summarize the key takeaways, wrap up, remind people of what they learned. Really, I like to think about putting frosting on a cake and sprinkles on top of the frosting at the end. They've had their cake and now put some frosting on it and remind them and wrap it up and give it to them. Also, here's a great time to thank the audience and be genuine and authentic. Tell them how much it means that they are part of your journey and that you get to be part of theirs, and really encourage a way for them to communicate with you. And then one thing that I really love that requires more pre-production is to tease the next episode. And bonus points here if you can actually include audio clips from the next episode, which will require a very well planned out production schedule. How many episodes are you going to release every month? When are you going to record those episodes? When does the editor need those episodes by? What production elements are you going to include into each episode? Plan all of that out, and then make sure that you share some before and after stuff of your podcast makeover with us here, because I just got to see what's going to happen. And then don't forget that research is always going to be an amazing way that you can increase the listener's experience by researching them, what they like, what content they listen to. That would be your ICA or your ideal customer avatar research in marketing terms. Really get to know them. You should really have a feeling and an idea of who your ideal listener is, of who you're making your podcast for. Define the goals of each one of your episodes. What are the goals that I have for this episode? What is the experience that I'm going to give them? And what are the calls to action? Where do I want to take them after the episode? Create an outline. Make sure that every episode you have has an outline, and stick to your outline. When you're interviewing a guest, practice at keeping things to those bullet points. And then bonus points if you incorporate keyword research and SEO tactics into those bullet points, with the intention of extracting little clips from each one of your episodes that maybe answer one smaller query than what the episode in total answers. And then that brings us for the last category for this video with my last few tips. Now, I know this goes really deep, so make sure that you leave some comments here. Tell me how you're feeling, and don't be a stranger. Let's keep this conversation going. Share your podcast below. We'd really like to see your podcast go places, and I'd really like to see the results of a cool podcast makeover. And the last category is marketing and community building. So with marketing, of course, it's a good idea to be active on social media. We know that podcasts are great relationship builders, but they're not the best at grabbing that immediate attention the way that we can do on social media. The podcast players don't have these advanced and intrusive algorithms that just suggest content to people. So we can split up pieces from our podcast to share on the social media platforms with a cool repurposing strategy, like I alluded to a moment ago. But really here is just to pick where we think our ideal listener would most likely be hanging out. And that would be the platform that we'd want to go hang out on and put out a bunch of promotional content and really just try to actually be there and be present on that platform and start real conversations with people. This is all about building what they would call an ideal listener profile and really understanding who your ideal listener is. And if you can go find them on social media and start conversations with them, that can be invaluable in terms of being able to make a really good podcast for them. So clever and strategic repurposing efforts are always going to give you a bigger bang for your buck in terms of your podcasting. And the same podcast editor that you're working with, if you hire a good professional, They can also do this repurposing for you. Many of them can create short video clips or audiograms to go along with little snippets from your episode. They can also repurpose your episode into blog posts or little social media captions. It's amazing what having one extra person on your team would give you. And then as you grow, you can get more people on your team and you can continue to grow and reach more people with this amazing message and these amazing gifts and ideas that you have to share. So that's it. And I just want to finish up one more time by being honest with you and looking you straight in the face and saying, you are worthy. You are worthy and capable and talented and unique and gifted, and you deserve all of the love in the world. So feel that, bring that confidence into your body, bring that confidence into your mind, and then go out into the world with your podcast with the intention of entertaining and educating people and giving people an experience rather than seeking validation from or wanting people to give you validation or to get that fame or to get that money. The fame and the money will come. And in fact, it comes a lot quicker the more you can be in that second category of trying to make content for people. I hope you found this to be inspiring. Don't be a stranger. Keep coming back to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Share this video with another podcaster who you know might have the podcasting blues or who may have just gone through an uncomfortable pod fade. And until the next video, happy casting.